I wanted to share a couple of pieces from an article that I've read. It's not a super current article. It was written after Charlottesville happened, the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, and it's a pretty good example of the leftist insanity of current policies that are explicitly anti-white. If you're just honest with looking at the situation, you'll see how anti-white the controlled media is. The title of the article is "My Fellow White People, If You're Not Part of the Solution, You're Part of the Problem," by Katherine Craig, and this is from our lovely news source, The Guardian. A link will be in the description of the video if you'd like to read the whole thing. "For the record, I'm white. I don't hate other white people. Lots of my friends are white." What white person would say, "Lots of my friends are white"? This is someone who does not identify as white, who's trying to make a statement. Because if you're a white person, you're like, "Hey, I don't hate black people. Look at how many black friends I have." You don't have to say, "Look at how many friends I have of this race," if you are that race. You're already part of that group. That doesn't make sense. So this is already just a red flag triggering me that, oh, this person's obviously Jewish. Which, a lot of the journalists, especially the heavily left-leaning journalists out there, just happen to be Jewish because coincidences. Continuing on. "Yet the statement, 'all white people are racist,' doesn't make me angry. It makes me sad, because I believe it's probably true." Look, there's only two situations that could be possible here where you would have that mindset. Either one, you're not white, and you want white people to suffer and fail. Or two, you're white and inflicted with so much guilt that you think you deserve to suffer and fail, but not only that you personally deserve to suffer and fail, but that everyone who is white must suffer because of something? Because, well, there's no reason that has to be given. It's because white is evil. And when you just plaster a label like evil on something, it's like, oh, it's inherently good to make white people suffer because they are the cause of so much bad things in the world. That is just a fucking Jewish way of getting around having to put any reason out there. It's making an entire group of people a pariah so that you can just throw mud at them. And that's seen as good. It's great to make white people more muddy, to make white places more muddy, because that's inviting diversity, which is what white people need. I'm getting too fucking triggered by this. Moving on. "Just to be clear, I unequivocally oppose all forms of racism. As a human rights lawyer," fucking shoot, a lawyer, of course, "I've brought cases against individuals, companies, and governments for racial discrimination." A lawyer who focuses on racial discrimination cases. Jews. That area of expertise is overly dominated by Jews. "I've attended protests opposing racist policies. I've boycotted companies that made racist statements or behaved in a discriminatory fashion. I've laid wreaths in the slave dungeons of West Africa and gas chambers of Eastern Europe. And I've called out racist language, including when it meant placing myself at risk." Well, you're not calling out your own racist language against whites here, saying that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Yeah, there's a really big blind spot where people just don't recognize that you can be racist against white people, and that should be recognized as a bad thing, but it's one rule for them and it's another rule for us. They're the goyim, they're so easily fooled. We have all this chutzpah, we can just say whatever we want. They don't do anything about it because they're stupid goys. Anyway. "I've called out racist language, including when it meant placing myself at risk. I have supported community groups and organizations championing rights for people of color and have tried hard to serve them with humility. And yes, I have lots of black friends. But that doesn't mean my thoughts or actions have never been tarnished by a subconscious, racially prejudicial thought." As an aside, all of this stuff about subconscious racism and microaggressions is just outright bullshit. It's just another reason to say, oh, you're racist, and even if you don't think you're racist, you're still racist. And racist is just this term for evil that you can just put on any white person so that you can hate them. So it's racial hatred by any other name. Well, it's specifically anti-white hatred, because you wouldn't call a Chinese person as racist for wanting to be around other Chinese people. But if a white person wants to be around other white people and celebrate white culture, then they're a fucking Nazi. So, fucking double standards all around. Back to the article. Too often, we seem to think that racism means actively doing or saying something racist. Not so. This is exactly, I hate to be detracted again, but this is exactly what I was saying with it's bullshit to say racism is subconscious, because you're not doing anything actively, but you're still guilty. That's fucking bullshit. You're not committing the act of crime, but there's this unconscious woo-woo magic that's completely immeasurable. Schrodinger's racism. So you're evil no matter what. It's just another way to, like a gotcha law. Oh, you're not actually doing anything, but you're still subconsciously being racist, so you're wrong either way. And you see this with Jews all the time. Even if nothing makes sense, they do some logic bending, backflipping bullshit to say, oh, well, you're wrong if this, but you're also wrong if that. And this very, very famous in psychology with Freud of, well, everything comes down to sexualization as a child, which is another fucking Jewish piece of shit. And if you don't think that you had problems with sexualization as a child and sexual fixations, well, then you're just subconsciously suppressing those desires of sexuality or some bullshit like that. So in other words, it's using that high verbal IQ to make it a game of heads I win, tails you lose. And anyone should know, with Jews, you lose. Moving on. We live in a society that's built on the spoils of racism. Of course, because America was built on cotton. And that continues to benefit from inequality in all its forms. How? How are we exploiting anyone? In modern day, what spoils of racism are making the world better? Well, here's their answer to that. Slavery and colonialism at the hands of white supremacy played a huge part in the shaping of the United Kingdom and much of the West into the superpower that it is today. Look, nobody alive today had any hand in slavery or colonialism. Okay? Oh, look, next thing they say. Why does that make me a racist, I hear you ask? It comes down to this. In Western society, we're all taught Jewish bullshit incoming. In Western society, we're all taught explicitly or implicitly, it doesn't matter if it's active because it's implicit, that lighter is better. Those racist narratives are particularly prevalent in the US, but you're kidding yourself if you think we Britons don't suffer from the same prejudice. Take, for example, the stereotypical portrayals of black people in the media, like the magical Negro, are you talking about? Let's go with your bullshit about portrayals of people in media. When was the last time you saw a happy stay-at-home mother? When was the last time that you saw a woman that wasn't a fucking bitch? When was the last time that you saw a woman who was warm and kind to a man and not emotionally deranged or trying to manipulate someone? When was the last time that you saw a competent white man? Just like at all, unless his purpose is to suffer and die. This whole thing of, oh, it's just skin color where lighter is better, and it's just that's how people are thinking on such a very basic level. They think, oh, white skin good, black skin bad. You don't think that people observe the behavior of other people around them and then maybe notice, hey, these black people tend to act pretty fucking violent and selfish. You know, like, people are capable of recognizing behavioral patterns amongst others. And it's not the skin color thing. It's behavior. It's looking at how people act in general trends. And, you know, every individual is an individual, so there will be exceptions, but you find general patterns across populations. Continuing on. The net effect of this conscious and subconscious racism was reflected in a recent study recreating the landmark Dole test of the 1940s. It showed that we are still living in a society where dark things are devalued and white things are valued. In other words, if you grow up in a racist society through no fault of your own, some of that racism is bound to stick up subconsciously. This whole, through no fault of your own, you're fucking evil, is bullshit. It's an unconscious conspiracy in which we are all complicit unless we fight it. You must feel guilt, white man. But there's more! There's more, you say? How could there be fucking more? Western society as a whole is a system rooted in white supremacy, designed to benefit, prioritize, and protect white people before anyone of any other race. If we were actually organized to protect the interests of white people, we wouldn't be bringing in a whole bunch of non-whites and then giving them a whole bunch of gibs. And also, look at the use of welfare in the United States. It's mostly going towards non-whites. And the non-whites take more out of the government in general than they pay into it, except for East Asians. But if we didn't have blacks and Mexicans in America, like if we had a pure white ethno-state in America, like if the 1965 Hart-Celler Act wasn't passed, 1965 Hart-Celler Act, look it up if you're not familiar with it. If we maintained our demographics prior to that, where we had significant white majority, then we would not be in debt anywhere near to the degree that we are today, even if we started a whole bunch of bullshit wars for Israel. This article is trying to say that Western society cares about white interests, when it doesn't. Everything about modern politics is trying to deconstruct white identity, deconstruct Western identity, and make white people atomized, not have any sense of culture, not have any sense of unity amongst other whites. It's all about consumerism and individualism. There is no system of whites protecting other whites. If we actually had that, then we wouldn't be in the little pickle that we find ourselves in right now on the edge of a race war. And this journalist has the chutzpah to go on to say there's a lot of evidence to support that claim, the claim that Western society is a system made to benefit white people. There's a lot of evidence to support that claim. For example, you're 6 times more likely to get stopped by the police if you're black. Oh, it has nothing to do with the general patterns of niggers being violent. Unemployment rates are twice as high for ethnic minorities than for white people. Oh, but this has nothing to do with minorities not having the capability to develop skills for employment or just the willpower to go out and pursue employment. Oh, and the government kind of gives handouts to minorities much more than to white people. So if they're already able to get by on government handouts, then what incentive do they have to work? Black and minority ethnic BAME people are more likely to suffer from mental health problems and experience discrimination in accessing mental health crisis care. Well, when it comes to suicide rates, that's something that disproportionately affects white men. I mean to say that white men are the most likely demographic group to commit suicide, and depression affects white people in the West much more than any other demographic group. The lethal mental health problem of suicide, that's something that affects whites more so than any other group. I don't know what the fuck they're trying to say. Mental health problems. If you're talking about being, like, mentally handicapped, then yeah, 70 IQ and below is technically being mentally handicapped. And when you have a mean IQ score, 1 standard deviation below that of whites, and you're halfway already there to being retarded as the average. But when it comes to depression and suicide, it's overwhelmingly considered a white problem. There's other articles out there that gloat about depression is white people problems. And a lot of the depression that's affecting whites in the West is coming from this lack of community, this lack of connection to anyone else, because that's something that guards against depression significantly, is high socialization or high social capital, being able to have people around you who you trust, who you feel comfortable around. And in the West, whites don't have strong communities where you're around other people that respect you and that care about you. That's very rare to find, especially in a city sort of situation. So this is bullshit, saying that black and minority ethnic people are more likely to suffer from mental health problems. The largest mental health problem by far in the West is depression, which disproportionately affects whites. And that is a systemic problem because of the constant railing that's going against white culture. And white is evil, as the mainstream Lügenpresse says. People from minority groups are more likely to experience homelessness, and the number of hate crimes in the UK doubled this year. Well, I'm sure the definition for a hate crime has more than doubled in its expansion for what counts as a hate crime. Mean words on the internet can get you in jail in the UK. Hopefully that's going to be changing around, because the United Nations recently passed a declaration about human rights and free expression on the internet, where it should be seen as a basic human right to be able to freely express your opinion on the internet. That was just recently passed, and this article is from about a year ago. Continuing on about that. Again, the context for this article is this was something that was written while things were still boiling over and very hot and heavy after the Charlottesville Unite the Right protests. Our society has structural inequalities that benefit white people over people of color. Really? Like, we have affirmative action for whites? because it sounds like you're saying stuff that's bullshit and you're not substantiating yourself. In the same way that structural inequalities around class, gender, sexuality, age, and disability benefit certain groups over others. Yes, if you're a woman from a low socioeconomic household, if you're gay, or if you are disabled in some way,